there's a common misconception that being part of the LGBTQIA plus community in general will just make you someone who's completely educated in all aspects of that community. So I think people outside of that community maybe just think that if you're part of that, then you know everything inside it, and we don't. We're literally learning something all the time. So it's everybody's responsibility to try to educate. And I think as long as you can get things wrong, I think as long as you're coming at it with the intention of trying to accept and understand and learn, then it can never be a bad thing to have those discussions. And that's why, like Jessica said, it's great that in media it's so much, even in my lifetime, so much more common now to have conversations about things that we were really scared to ask about not that long ago. But I got programs like RuPaul's Drag Race and things on mainstream television having open conversations about their gender identities and things, which is really nice to see.
I think certain, people in certain groups maybe were more kind of maybe caricatured previously, whereas now, like you're saying, it's more mainstream, it's more commonplace to see that. So there is some progress, whereas I think when I grew up in the 80s, perhaps also because of the HIV/AIDS crisis and that climate of fear, and I certainly grew up associating homosexuality with death, which you do internalize. You're then internalizing that fear and anxiety. And I think anyone that was in the media as kind of openly different in some way in terms of gender or sexuality was kind of maybe only allowed to be that way because it was for the mainstream people's entertainment.
Yeah, like Savage or something like that.
Exactly. So there were certain people who were kind of allowed to hold that position because, they were a celebrity, they were a kind of celebrity caricature and it was everybody's entertainment. Kind of cishet normative, kind of society would allow certain people to be a certain way, but that did not mean, I don't believe, that it was kind of permissible or acceptable for everyone else to kind of embrace that. It was just reserved for kind of a few roles, if that makes sense.
A few treasures.
Yeah, a few national treasures. Yeah.
So at the same time, we might have been, people were laughing at them as well. So there was a side, there were national treasures, absolutely, but they're a bit of, well, they're like that kind of thing. So it's difficult to unpick, but yeah. The other thing I think is everyone's story is different as an individual. So just sort of lumping is too strong a word, but lumping people in a group, people are very different as individuals, and their story and their backgrounds and where they are in their lives, and that might change in the future as well, is very different. So it's interesting people are individuals.
We have to remember that the state had quite a punitive role really over the last few hundred years in kind of regulating people's sexuality. And relatively recently, I think it was 2002, they equalised the age of consent because it was 21, I think, when I was a youngster. We've obviously made progress with civil partnerships and now gay marriage, but these are all relatively recent gains, certainly in my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean the Marriage Equality Act was very recent.
Yeah, as a gay person, I never thought I'd be able to get married, but so it's absolutely fantastic when I could. And what I liked as well was a friend's child came along, and that was the first wedding they'd come to, and it was an equal marriage. So I thought that was so good. So
yeah, so they'll grow up thinking that's absolutely normal.
Exactly, absolutely. Yeah.
My husband was in the Navy for many years, and all the time he was in the Navy, he left quite a few years, it was probably about 15 years ago. It was not, you weren't allowed to be gay in the forces, so anyone, and there obviously were lots of gay people in the forces, but they had to be incredibly discreet and never mention it because they would lose their livelihood if that was the case. And we certainly met people and that you thought probably were gay, but you could never ask them that because it would put them in a terrible position of losing their livelihood. And that's not that long ago. So the history is important, I think, to understand.
I think it's like with most things, that's specifically within the community we're talking about now. There were times when people couldn't possibly fathom the idea that a man could be attracted to another man, and then, you know, throughout time we learned more and more about it. So I think for us in this community, it's really important to approach everything with the idea that at one stage we may not know, comprehend or understand, but that in the people are living this experience in the future one day, through education, through learning about it, through asking people, through talking about it, we'll get to that stage where we can say, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I can actually understand, appreciate, support, and you know, let live and validate. Yeah, I suppose. So it's all the time. There are new, I suppose there are always going to be new letters probably to add, to the point where we are going to have most of the alphabet at one stage, but that's fine as well. I think, like, you know, there'll always be someone, and I think if somebody says they define as something, in my mind, it's their right to be able to define themselves as whatever that is, and it is our responsibility as other human beings to let them live as that and identify as that. And that's what I've learned with my own prejudices fading over time as I've grown up. My own, you know, I've learned to try to approach things like that. Things is very like term, but
with an open mind.
Yes,
you have to go with an open mind and an open heart, and the sort of principle of, you know, everyone's free to love who they choose, really. So I think that's the key,
in whatever way they choose.
And that's the most important thing, I think, for most people, hopefully, to take away.